Before we begin this deep dive, just a gentle but really necessary note.
Mm,
This conversation is going to touch on some challenging and painful issues, specifically around suicide and mental health struggles,
especially in young people.
especially in young people.
Mm.
So if you or someone you know is listening and is currently struggling, please remember you do not have to carry that weight alone.
It's so important to say that.
It is. Reach out to someone you trust or seek professional help. You are not alone.
It's a critical reminder, and it really it sets the right tone for the sensitivity we need here.
Absolutely, because today we are diving deep into a difficult, painful, and, well, a profoundly paradoxical pattern.
It really is a paradox.
One that we're seeing emerge in these small, often really geographically isolated communities all over the globe.
Right.
I mean, when we talk about progress, we all sort of rely on this foundational, hopeful belief, don't we, that education protects young people.
But it's a shield.
Exactly. That intelligence safeguards them. We assume that having a stable job, the very definition of success, is the ultimate armor against despair.
And yet, what the source material shows us, and it's repeated across these vast distances and cultures, is this incredibly specific repeating profile.
Tell us about that profile.
Young adults, always. Early 20s, mid-20s, late 20s. And the person affected is so often highly educated.
A student, a teacher.
A student, a teacher, or a working professional who has, by all external measures, already achieved what their community defined as success.
And what repeats just as consistently as that profile is the silence.
The deafening silence.
A completely impenetrable silence that settles around these deaths afterward. A silence that feels almost mandated by culture.
And enforced by fear. That silence, coupled with the profile of the victims, is the key signal for us.
What does it signal?
It tells us that the problem is not, at its core, economic. It's fundamentally sociological and psychological.
All right, so today, we're not focusing on individual tragedies, as heartbreaking as they are. We are asking a much bigger, more systemic question.
Mm-hmm.
Why do young, educated people in these quiet, incredibly close-knit, high-achieving communities suffer so deeply without ever being heard?
And to get at that, our mission is to gain some real analytical clarity.
How are we going to do that?
By analyzing the surprising and, I think, crucial overlap between two places that are literally oceans apart. The small mountainous region of Gojal Hunza in Pakistan.
And the vast, icy nation of Greenland.
That comparison is going to be our lens.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's set the stage in Gojal Hunza first, because we have to start with an exercise in radical honesty about the data.
Or the lack of it.
Or, more accurately, the systemic lack of data.
Right. When you start analyzing the situation in Gojal Hunza, the very first hurdle you hit is this massive limitation in verifiable public information.
There's no list.
We do not have, and we likely won't get one soon, a clean, public, verified list of cases. And this isn't, due to some malicious withholding. It's driven by an intense, culturally rooted need for privacy.
Because the subject is just so sensitive. Any event like this in such a tight-knit community has this profound immediate impact.
Of course. And so many cases remain private, or they're simply never officially reported to outside authorities, to medical institutions, or even to local media in a way that's verifiable.
So what we're working with, what the source material is built on, is something we have to call a partial truth.
That's a good way to put it. It's a reality that's been painstakingly pieced together from these fractured community memories, from local media reports that often have to use coded language.
Or they just skirt around the specific nature of the death.
Exactly. And most importantly, it comes from those really difficult, quiet conversations happening behind closed doors.
Between who? Community leaders.
Community leaders, family members, people trying to make sense of it all.
Can we spend a moment on that? What does this partial truth actually look like in practice? I mean, how does a community grapple with a crisis that it refuses to officially name?
It creates this tremendous internal dissonance. The community knows the pattern.
Of course they do.
They know the ages, they know the family, it's often neighbors or even close relatives. The pattern becomes an open secret.
But a secret you can't speak about.
A secret that cannot be spoken in public forums or institutional settings. And this silence, it serves multiple functions. On one hand, it protects the immediate family from just overwhelming scrutiny and shame.
Which is understandable.
Very.
Yeah.
But crucially, it also protects the community's broader narrative of success and progress.
And yet, even with that intentional silence, this partial truth, it still paints a clear and deeply disturbing pattern.
Oh, absolutely. It allows for a real sociological analysis. The
Yeah.
profile is just strikingly consistent.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly young people, almost always in their 20s. And critically, a very high proportion of them are educated.
So we find students on the verge of graduating from really competitive universities.
Yes, and established teachers and young working professionals who have successfully migrated to urban centers and, secured respectable employment.
And this is where the analytical pivot happens. This is where the sources really push us to rethink everything we assume. Because that specific profile-educated, employed young guard, it immediately tells us what this crisis is not about.
This is the critical insight we have to emphasize. If we see educated, employed young professionals struggling to this point, we can't just blame grinding poverty.
It's not the first easy answer.
No, we can't blame a lack of access to basic schooling because these individuals haven't just accessed it, they have excelled at it.
And we can't just simplify the trigger down to, say, just unemployment or economic issues.
Right, so the very presence of a university degree and a stable income, it's deceptive. It hides this profound emotional and systemic gap between what they achieved and what they are now expected to sustain.
That is a crucial shift in the diagnosis, isn't it?
It is. When the problem persists across demographic lines we traditionally associate with success, high education, high employment, it forces us to look beyond the usual economic explanations.
The ones that dominate policy discussion.
Exactly. It implies a much deeper underlying issue rooted in the speed of social change, the rigidity of the social structure, and the complete lack of systemic support.
So it's not a crisis of opportunity.
No, they have opportunities. It's a crisis of adaptation.
That is a powerful distinction. And it fundamentally changes where the responsibility for the diagnosis lies. It shifts the burden from, oh, they just need a better job,
to they need a resilient environment and they need a voice.
Let's spend time on that, on the failure to adapt. What does that look like in their day-to-day lives?
Well, failure to adapt in this context, it's not about failing to use a smartphone or learn English. It's about the failure of the community's emotional and social infrastructure to keep pace with all the material changes.
Give me an example.
Okay, so think about the pressure of a new professional role in a distant city like Karachi. The social fabric there is transactional, it's isolating. That's a fundamentally different experience than their parents' or grandparents' lives.
Which were deeply communal.
Communal and identity affirming, even if they were physically much harder. So the community equipped them to succeed professionally, but it failed to equip them emotionally for the inevitable cost of that success.
So the very act of fulfilling the community's hope leaving home, getting the education, getting the high-pressure job, is the same act that cuts them off from the support systems that might help them cope with that pressure.
That's a terrible feedback loop.
It's a terrible irony.
It is, and that irony is exactly what leads us to this unexpected comparison with Greenland.
Okay, so this is the moment for the big intellectual leap that really underpins this whole analysis. Why on earth are we comparing a small, high-altitude, mountainous region in Pakistan with Greenland?
Right.
I mean, a vast, low-population Arctic nation. They could not be more different on paper.
Different religion, vastly different histories, entirely different languages, climates that are the definition of opposite. It feels counterintuitive.
It does.
And we have to acknowledge those vast differences up front because they are profound. However, social scientists, public health researchers, when they're trying to understand these persistent, widespread tragedies...
Yeah, don't look at the surface stuff.
Exactly. They don't prioritize superficial cultural markers. They prioritize what the sources call comparable life conditions and social dynamics. And when you apply that lens, the overlap between Gojal Hunza and Greenland becomes, well, it's astonishingly striking.
It provides a crucial analytical mirror.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's detail those shared life conditions that justify this parallel.
Yeah.
What are the foundational similarities?
Firstly, they are both small, profoundly close-knit communities. In both places, social identity is deeply communal. Everyone knows everyone.
So the actions of one person ripple across the whole social structure.
Immediately. Secondly, they share a profound degree of geographic isolation, whether that's enforced by the Himalayas or the Arctic ice. And that isolation, it limits external resources, and reinforces a reliance on internal community-based
For
solutions.
better or for worse.
For better or for worse.
And you mentioned the climate. While it's obviously different, they both share the experience of these long, challenging seasons.
Yes. Long, dark, incredibly isolating winters in Greenland, and then these harsh infrastructure-limiting periods of isolation in Gojal's valleys. This environmental hardship shapes everything: mental resilience, access to care,
And they both have these incredibly strong family ties,
which can be protective, but
but also contribute to that crushing burden of expectation we talked about.
exactly. But the single most compelling similarity, the one that makes Greenland such an analytical gift for understanding Gojal Hunza, is that shared experience of rapid generational social change.
Happening over a really short period of time.
Compressed into just 30 or 40 years, a
Yeah.
single generation.
So we're looking at these parallel processes of modernization that happen so fast,
Yeah.
they just destabilize the social and emotional infrastructure.
Precisely. Because Greenland has been dealing with this crisis for longer, and because it has a stronger, more centralized government, they've been able to commission detailed research.
So they have the data.
Social scientists there have studied this for decades. This gives us the analytical clarity, the defined data, and the established causal links that Gojal Hunza currently lacks. Greenland offers the diagnosis, which lets us understand the symptoms in Gojal.
And the situation in Greenland isn't just serious. It's an established acute public health tragedy. It's documented as having one of the highest suicide rates in the world.
Absolutely. The crisis is acutely felt specifically among young people, and historically it has disproportionately affected young men.
And because it's been a known public health emergency for decades, researchers have been able to pour resources into understanding the fundamental mechanisms at play.
Sociologists, anthropologists, public health experts, you name it.
So after all that extensive research, what did the findings definitively link the dramatic rise in rates to?
The primary causal link is rapid modernization and social upheaval,
Often linked to.
often linked to the history of Danish colonial rule and its subsequent effects. The research shows that the dramatic increase in suicides followed this period of intense, often government-forced, transformation and urbanization in the 1950s and 60s.
And before that period.
Before that, life was undeniably physically difficult. You're relying on traditional subsistence, hunting, fishing.
But the social structures were clear.
The cultural roles, the hierarchy, community elders, skilled hunters, they were clear, stable, and identity-affirming.
And when modernization hit, those old traditions and structures didn't just evolve, they weakened quickly, violently even.
Correct. When new centralized housing was built and people were moved from small, isolated settlements into larger towns, the old communal bonds just frayed.
And the old skills lost their value.
The traditional skills that define a man's worth, being a skilled hunter, being able to read the ice, suddenly held very little value in the new government-administered white-collar or service-based economy.
Which leads to what the source describes as the in-between state.
Yes.
Let's define that clearly for the listener. What does it mean to be suspended between two worlds?
It means that the old ways of living, the old traditions and support structures, they became functionally obsolete. Or they were actively suppressed by the new administration.
Not the new systems.
Yet the new systems, modern Western education, formalized jobs, urban housing, global media, they failed to fully replace the emotional and social safety nets the old ways provided.
So young people found themselves without firm footing in either world.
It's the ultimate identity crisis, weaponized by societal change. The old path to worth being a proficient hunter or provider is blocked or devalued.
And the new path to worth academic and corporate success is hyper-competitive, isolating, and often culturally unfamiliar.
The resulting structural instability created this enormous reservoir of stress, confusion, and a profound existential meaninglessness.
And who is most vulnerable to that?
The young generation. They're the ones who are often the first to embrace the change, the first to move to the city, the first to be educated in the new system.
Only to discover that the promised future lacked the fundamental human element of belonging.
That in-between generation is the one that struggles most profoundly with self-worth.
And this insight is so crucial for understanding Gojal, because while the historical trauma of colonization is unique to Greenland, that structural mechanism, the in-between state caused by ultra-rapid change, that's transferable.
We can draw a straight line from that sociological diagnosis in Greenland to the symptoms we see in Gojal Hunza.
The Gojal youth, too, are navigating a world where Their grandparents' traditions are celebrated, but
Functionally irrelevant to survival.
while their own educational attainment comes at the cost of their emotional stability.
The external forces are different, but the internal consequence, that speed mismatch between material progress and emotional capacity, is identical.
Okay, let's take that clear, evidence-based framework from Greenland and apply it directly back to what we're seeing in Gojal Hunza.
Yeah.
This is where we stop talking about two different places and start seeing a sociological mirror image.
Exactly. The sources isolate four powerful shared forces that drive this specific type of crisis.
And the first is the fundamental engine of it all.
The pace of change versus the pace of emotional adaptation.
Right. So we established the parallel modernization. In Greenland, it was highly centralized, sometimes coercive government policy. But in Gojal Hunza, modernization arrived, maybe more organically, but just as swiftly.
It arrived via massive investment in education, the construction of new roads connecting them to Pakistan's main cities.
And the explosion of technology and migration for white-collar work.
This massive societal reengineering happened incredibly fast. Within a single generation, it changed the local identity from, say, farmers and communalists to scholars and global professionals.
And that speed mismatch is lethal.
It is. The culture, the collective memory, the traditional social safety valves, all of those things can only adapt so quickly. When the organism changes its behavior faster than it can process the emotional and psychological implications.
The stress has nowhere to go but inward.
The sources repeatedly confirm that. When material change is faster than emotional adaptation, people struggle silently. They internalize the resulting anxiety as a personal failure.
Can you give us a concrete example of what that adaptation failure looks like in daily life?
It's both stress and difficulty with new social roles, and they feed each other. So think about the economic shift. Historically, success was measured locally.
Did you contribute to the community? Was your harvest good?
Exactly. Did you honor your family? Now, a young person in Karachi or Islamabad, educated on the community's dime, is measured by these hyper-competitive global metrics.
Securing a job in finance, getting a master's abroad, maintaining a certain lifestyle.
Right. And the emotional failure is when they realize that the traditional support network back home cannot comprehend the loneliness of a competitive 60-hour work week in an anonymous city. They can't provide any meaningful emotional support for that specific type of pressure.
So they might intellectually understand that moving away for a job is progress, but the emotional costs of leaving that deeply identity-affirming community, adapting to massive competition, dealing with professional failure,
Feeling isolated.
all of that is never acknowledged or processed communally. They just internalize it.
Which confirms their deepest fear, that their struggle is a personal moral failing. And this rapid change, it doesn't just introduce competition, it also introduces these new expectations of perfection.
From social media.
The rise of digital communication, global media.
Right.
It means young people are constantly comparing their struggles not just to their immediate peers, but to a digitized, curated, often false image of global success.
That pressure cooker effect.
A profound one. And it's largely invisible to the older generation whose world was defined by different, clearer standards of worth.
Which brings us directly to the second shared force. This toxic combination of silence and stigma. You have this massive, unacknowledged internal pressure from the speed mismatch, and then you are culturally forbidden from finding a language for it.
It's pain without language. Researchers in Greenland found that for many, many years, talking about suicide was actively avoided. It was a deep cultural taboo, a painful secret kept exclusively within the immediate family.
And in Gojal Hunza, that same mechanism shows up as this profound struggle to even use the language of anxiety or depression without attaching this massive weight of shame to it.
If the only language available for struggle is the language of shame, people will choose silence every single time.
Of course they will.
If you can't name your pain, if the words "I am struggling," "I am anxious," or "I need help" are seen as evidence of moral deficiency, character weakness, or personal failure.
You're forced to suffer invisibly.
You are. The shame ensures that the individual becomes their own jailer. They silence themselves for the sake of their family's reputation and the community's comfort.
And invisible suffering is, by definition, suffering that cannot be intercepted.
Right. If the community, whether in Nuuk, Greenland, or in a village in Gojal, avoids the conversation, they remove the very first and most crucial layer of protection.
Which is just communal awareness and validation.
The stigma acts as this powerful, almost unbreakable barrier. It ensures that the necessary intervention from a compassionate friend, a family member, a professional, never even gets a chance to start.
So the tragic irony is that the silence is intended to protect the family honor and the cultural comfort zone.
But by empowering the internal pain, it achieves the exact opposite of protection.
Now let's talk about the institutional failure. The third shared force is the acute weakness or just the outright absence of professional support systems.
This tragedy unfolds on a spectrum, but the underlying systemic weakness is the same. Even Greenland, which is a nation-state with more resources,
It has studied this for decades.
even they still struggle massively with the accessibility and cultural appropriateness of adequate mental health care, especially services tailored to small, isolated, and culturally distinct communities.
And if that's the struggle in Greenland, where there are at least some resources, the situation in Gojal Hunza, it must be acutely amplified.
It is. The sources highlight that professional, localized mental health support is extremely limited. Often, it's just non-existent in the communities themselves,
So if you need help, you have to travel hundreds of miles to a large city.
which immediately introduces massive logistical and financial barriers on top of the stigma barrier we just talked about.
And this creates a deeply destructive cultural feedback loop that just solidifies the silence.
It does. You have a community that values and often demands strength. The expectation is that people must be strong, show resilience, overcome difficulties through sheer willpower.
But the demands placed on that young generation are systemic.
Right.
The stress of rapid cultural displacement, high financial expectation, the pressure of global competition, raw internal strength is simply not a sufficient defense against that.
It's the difference between asking someone to be resilient against a financial setback versus asking them to withstand a systemic shockwave.
Exactly. The force of the systemic pressure is just too great for individual willpower to resist indefinitely. This is why the source material leads us to this grim conclusion. Strength without support breaks.
Strength without support breaks.
The cultural expectation of self-reliance, when it's paired with the utter absence of a psychological or clinical safety net, it becomes a dangerous isolating factor itself.
So the young person feels they have to fail alone.
Because the only path available is to internalize their distress and view reaching out as a total admission of a failure of character rather than a normal appeal for health care.
And finally, the fourth shared force, which is so intimately tied to the rapid change, the age profile. This isn't an aging population problem. This is explicitly and overwhelmingly a youth crisis in both places. Yes, and this links directly back to the idea that the youth are not just the recipients of change, they are often the agents of the change.
They're the ones who got the modern education, they're the ones who migrated for the jobs.
Learn the new language, the new technology. They represent the investment, the risk, and the collective hope of the community for an upward trajectory.
Which means they carry an enormous, almost crushing, weight of hope and expectation.
A burden their parents' generation, who were anchored in clear traditional roles, never had to carry in the same way.
No.
They're carrying high expectations, new financial responsibilities, often expected to support entire extended families from their urban salaries, and, critically, the collective weight of their family's hopes.
In the Gojal context, education is often the community's primary export, a huge collective investment.
It is. So the successful student represents the validation of years of communal sacrifice.
So to struggle, then, is not just to let yourself down. It feels like you're betraying the entire financial investment of your family, the community's narrative of progress.
And your own profound cultural mandate to succeed and uplift others. This burden transforms normal human struggle, a temporary setback, depression, anxiety, into a perceived existential failure.
When success is viewed as this zero-sum validation of the entire community's strategy, failure gets catastrophically magnified.
It makes the internal isolation even worse, because the higher the family's expectations, the more profound the silence the young person feels compelled to adopt when they begin to falter.
Okay, so we've established a very compelling sociological mirror image, identifying the forces at play. But we have to be honest about the differences, too.
Absolutely. The nuances tell us how the pressure is delivered and processed, even if the outcome is tragically similar.
And the historical contexts are really distinct.
Acknowledging this prevents us from oversimplifying the solution. Greenland's crisis, as it's been meticulously documented, is deeply and structurally rooted in colonization.
A massive external systemic wound.
It includes the disruptive relocation of communities, the active suppression of traditional language and culture, and the resulting deep intergenerational trauma.
Where emotional pain and instability are structurally passed down through the family line.
Making each subsequent generation more vulnerable. It is a profound systemic scar, Now contrast that with Gojal Hunza.
Right.
While Gojal is not immune to external pressures, the source highlights that the most acute pressure driving this specific youth crisis often originates from internal community expectations.
It's driven by the community's own powerful and successful narrative of progress, excellence, and modernization.
A narrative often championed by internal leaders and organizations.
So the mechanism of pressure is inverted. In Greenland, the structure was broken by an external force. In Gojal, the structure is strained to the breaking point by the very success it cultivated.
And that creates a specific, almost excruciating pressure multiplier. The expectations are clear and socially reinforced: be educated, secure success, usually outside the community.
Support the family financially.
And, crucially, represent the community and its progressive ideals well in the wider world. When you combine those four high demands, education, success, support, representation, the failure threshold is impossibly high.
So if someone struggles, emotionally or professionally, in that environment, they don't just feel like they're failing a project.
No, they feel they are undermining the entire investment and the moral narrative of their people. They feel they are failing many people at once.
This internal pressure, this expectation of maintaining a perfect narrative of progress, it creates a similarly isolating environment.
Profoundly difficult for the individual trying to maintain perfection while struggling internally. They can't admit the pressure because the pressure is tied to the community's highest aspirations.
Another fundamental difference, and one we need to spend some time on, is the data disparity. Greenland has quantifiable data, scientific studies, numbers. Gojal has silence and anecdotes.
And this difference isn't just academic, it has ruthless real-world implications.
The difference is stark. In Greenland, when they confront this crisis, they can point to decades of quantified data, specific demographics, longitudinal studies.
And clear, peer-reviewed analysis. This establishes the issue as a systemic public health crisis, which then mandates and justifies a national, even international, systemic response.
Data is the currency of policy.
It is. But in Gojal Hunza, without a clean list, without official reporting, with cases remaining rigorously private, the problem is structurally invisible to the policy world. It becomes a localized, tragic rumor rather than a documented crisis.
That is the critical danger of absent data.
Problems that lack quantitative evidence are just far easier for larger systems, governments, international aid organizations, NGOs to ignore.
Or to minimize or just dismiss as anecdotal.
Even if the local consensus and partial evidence is overwhelming, data silence allows systemic inertia to prevail because there's no mechanism to compel large-scale resource allocation.
So the cultural mechanism of silence, which is intended to protect the family, ends up starving the community of the very external resources they need to combat the systemic nature of the crisis.
It creates a self-trapping cycle. The shame preserves the silence prevents the gathering of data, and the lack of data prevents the arrival of external resources and specialized help.
It deprives the local leadership of the ammunition they need to demand funding.
Exactly. For culturally competent mental health clinics or specialized training programs, the anecdotal truth is powerful locally, but institutionally, it carries no weight without numbers.
So the lesson here is that an isolated community that wants to solve its internal problems can't rely solely on internal solutions when the root causes are these huge sociological shifts that require external resources.
Like trained psychologists, telecounseling infrastructure, public health campaigns.
And those resources only arrive when the crisis is proven by numbers. Okay, let's bring these threads together. Let's synthesize this. Based on everything we've talked about, what is the ruthless conclusion we have to draw?
The hard truth is this, and it really must be repeated for clarity. In both places, Greenland and Gojal Hunza suicide is not fundamentally a sign of personal weakness.
Or a lack of intelligence, or a character failure.
We must abandon that moralistic framework. It is instead a direct and measurable function of the environment they are forced to inhabit.
And the societal infrastructure around them.
Precisely. It is a function of environments that make extreme, almost impossible demands, demanding incredible professional success, demanding rapid emotional adaptation, demanding total resilience and self-reliance.
But at the same time, structurally failing to provide any safety nets, any emotional infrastructure, or professional support.
The system demands perfection, but offers no psychological grace.
Let's synthesize that toxic recipe for the listener, just to make it a memorable framework. What is the dangerous environment that breaks people, regardless of their personal strength?
Okay. It is the combination of immense, often externalized, high expectations.
Layered on top of.
A profound lack of emotional space or language for struggle. Then you add to that extremely limited or non-existent mental health care infrastructure.
And finally, you let it all simmer under a pervasive, culturally mandated blanket of silence and stigma.
That is the environment that systematically breaks young people, regardless of their intelligence or education level.
And this reinforces the initial paradox that brought us here. What doesn't protect the individual? We have to state this clearly.
Education alone does not protect you.
High-paying jobs alone.
Do not protect you. And even strong, good character alone does not inoculate individuals against this specific toxic environmental recipe.
In fact, by raising the stakes, they often make the burden heavier.
They do. The protective factors are almost entirely relational and systemic. This shifts the focus from individual blame to systemic responsibility.
So what does protect?
Connection, genuine, non-judgmental listening, a cultural space that validates struggle, and early, accessible professional help that is normalized within the community structure.
So the focus has to shift.
From judging the person who broke to fixing the toxic system that broke them.
That shift in focus brings us to the most practical and, I think, hopeful part of this conversation.
Yeah.
The research-based path forward.
Right.
We have decades of evidence from public health interventions in Greenland, combined with global suicide prevention efforts. This isn't theoretical.
No, this is what research consistently shows actually works to build that psychological safety net. We can leverage those clear findings. The sources lay out a really concise and actionable framework for building that crucial protective infrastructure.
So let's break that down. Let's start with the first and most fundamental pillar, the necessity of early and honest dialogue.
Talking early saves lives. But we have to clarify what that means.
It's not about delivering formal speeches or one-off lectures.
No, or moralizing from outsiders. It is about fundamentally cultivating genuine, honest, and accessible conversations about struggle, stress, mental health, and even suicidal ideation itself.
It requires normalizing the language of pain.
So that young people feel they have permission to use it without fear of immediate repercussion or shaming. If the only time we talk about suicide is after a tragedy has already happened, then we have structurally failed to protect.
It's about changing the ambient cultural temperature, making vulnerability a sign of humanity, not a sign of weakness.
Precisely. And this shift requires the older generation to lead by example, to admit their own struggles and stress in ways that were perhaps culturally inappropriate for them previously.
Okay, the second pillar addresses the fundamental challenge of logistics and access. Integrated help. Where should the support be located?
The location of support matters tremendously because friction kills intervention. Especially in isolated communities like Gojal Hunza, the support cannot be housed in some distant, stigmatized, formal mental hospital that requires a massive public journey to reach.
It has to be integrated.
Help must be available where young people already gather and where they feel safe and comfortable, in schools, within college campuses, embedded in local clinics, and in community spaces like sports clubs or youth centers.
Integrating it into existing, non-stigmatized infrastructure reduces that psychological friction of seeking help.
And it sends a powerful cultural signal that mental health is just another aspect of normal human health, like getting a checkup for a physical ailment.
But what about the challenge of confidentiality in small communities where everyone knows everyone?
That's a huge challenge. Seeing a local mental health professional can itself become a source of shame. Research suggests solutions like using mobile units, secure telecounseling options with external, non-local experts,
And training all local primary care doctors.
to screen for and refer mental distress with absolute discretion.
That leads directly to the third pillar, which focuses on the local network. Training community gatekeepers. Who are these people and what is their precise role?
The gatekeepers are the natural, trusted leaders and reliable figures in the community.
Teachers, religious elders.
Teachers, university administrators, religious elders, respected family members, youth leaders. These individuals must receive specific, targeted training to recognize the warning signs of distress and understand the dynamics of the speed mismatch we discussed.
But the critical caveat is defining their role. They are not professional therapists.
Exactly. Their job is not to judge, and it is not to attempt to provide complex clinical treatment. Their crucial role is simply to listen without fixing,
To notice changes in behavior.
to validate the struggle, and to facilitate the next step toward professional or institutional care. They serve as the initial, non-judgmental filter that intercepts the silence and guides the individual past the stigma barrier.
And their effectiveness relies entirely on their ability to maintain trust and be non-judgmental.
That non-judgmental aspect is the engine that breaks the stigma. If the first person you approach immediately responds with shame or moralizing advice, you just need to pray harder or be stronger, you will immediately retreat back into silence. The intervention fails.
Absolutely. Which connects to the fourth pillar, the most abstract but maybe the most necessary change, the normalization of health.
For any of these efforts to succeed long-term, communities have to fundamentally change their core view of mental well-being.
Stop treating it as a moral failing and start treating it as normal human health that is subject to illness and requires clinical care.
Precisely. The shame must be comprehensively lifted. When a broken leg or pneumonia is accepted as a normal part of the human condition requiring a doctor, but emotional struggle is hidden.
The community is broadcasting a powerful, toxic message.
That you must be perfectly whole and functionally successful at all times, regardless of the internal cost. Normalization is the cultural process of reversing that mandate.
And validating that struggle is simply a human condition under pressure. And the final, fifth pillar, this addresses the deepest casualty of the rapid change, the fragmentation of connection. This is cultivating belonging.
Yes, because when all the professional structures temporarily fail, the most fundamental, ancient protective factor is profound human connection and a feeling of community.
People survive pain better when they genuinely feel that they matter to the community around them.
Valued for who they are, not just what they achieve. And this isn't about forced or superficial socialization. It's about deliberately creating spaces, formal or informal, where young people can disconnect from the high-pressure success narrative and just feel seen, integral, and valued as contributors to the collective life.
Outside of their professional roles.
Yes.
Belonging is the antidote to the extreme isolation caused by rapid change and high-performance pressure. When they feel they belong, they are less likely to feel that their failure is a collective catastrophe that demands silence.
And this requires the community to intentionally redefine success, broadening the definition to include well-being, social contribution, and emotional health, alongside academic or financial attainment.
This deep dive has traveled a long way, from the valleys of Gojal Hunza to the icy expanse of Greenland, only to land on one universal, immutable truth about human progress and resilience. The core finding is about infrastructure. If you build roads and schools and cities without simultaneously building the emotional and social safety nets, you are creating a perfect environment for silent tragedy.
We began with silence, and we have to end by confronting it. If the decades of research in Greenland teach us one central lesson, it is this: silence does not protect culture.
It only protects the pain.
It only protects the pain. By shielding themselves from the difficult conversations, communities inadvertently allow that pain, that anxiety, that distress to intensify and spread structurally.
And if Gojal Hunza or any community facing rapid modernization wants to protect its young, successful, hopeful youth, the critical first step isn't achieving some new level of financial perfection or even greater educational attainment.
No.
It is achieving brutal, community-wide honesty about the depth and nature of the crisis they are already facing.
Honesty allows for the data to be collected. Honesty allows for the intervention to be implemented. Honesty allows for connection.
So our personal application for you, the listener, is essential. If this conversation made you think of someone in your life, someone carrying a heavy burden of expectation or struggling silently, reach out to them.
Just check in.
Check in. Listen, truly listen, without immediately offering advice or judgment. Just be present.
And if this conversation made you reflect on yourself and your own struggles, remember the lessons of adaptation. Reach out for help, speak to someone you trust, or seek professional support.
Remember this affirmation that challenges the cultural silence. You are not a burden for speaking your truth. You are fundamentally, completely human.
To leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that builds on that speed mismatch we discussed. If rapid technological, economic, and global change is an inevitable and continuous feature of the modern world, how can communities, especially isolated ones seeking rapid progress, shift their thinking from reactive measures to proactive infrastructure?
Meaning, how can they institutionalize emotional adaptation training and psychological infrastructure deliberately?
Exactly. How do we ensure that the cultural ability to cope, the listening, the dialogue, the support systems, is intentionally designed and funded to evolve at least as quickly as the need for academic success and technological integration?
That is the real challenge.
That is the real challenge for every community, balancing cherished tradition with the dizzying demands of modernization.